Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's we're going to be talking about the Dodge Ram Jeep Chrysler situation, the sales situation. More specifically, we're actually going to take a step back and talk about the Stellantis situation, the parent company of all of these different companies. But before we get into this video, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So I've already made a few videos talking about the Jeep and Ram sales situation and also the Stellantis sales situation. However, Cox Automotive just released a report of Stellantis' Q1 market performance, and they actually outlined some things in this report that I find absolutely fascinating. So first off, headline figures. Stellantis had their sales decline by 9% year over year, whereas the industry saw an 8% increase year over year. So most manufacturers are up, whereas Stellantis is down. We've already talked about this. And so this means that Stellantis had their market share drop down to 10.3% in the first quarter. And the most interesting headline figure, Stellantis cut their incentives to an average of $2,355 per vehicle, and their average transaction price went up to $55,577. We'll get back to that in just a moment. But basically, incentives are down, right, in terms of incentive spend, at the same time that transaction price is up with their product, at the same time that sales are down. And now when we dive into the individual brands, this will help kind of explain what is happening. So first off, if we start with Jeep, right? Jeep is actually pulling down Stellantis, which is crazy because prior to the pandemic, Jeep was such a strong brand. But they've had a sales decline of about 20% year over year. They sold just over 150,000 units. If you're wondering, prior to the pandemic, Jeep was selling over 200,000 units in the first quarter of the year. So it's a big sales decline. And the thing that's the craziest is Jeep's Grand Cherokee, right? One of their most iconic vehicles, their bestseller, had a sales decline of almost 30% year over year within the first quarter. And then other vehicles that they have, like the Grand Wagoneer and Wagoneer, those also saw sales declines. But the thing that's funny is they're more affordable vehicles, like the Cherokee and Compass, actually showed increases, right, in terms of overall sales volume year over year. And so it shows that the more expensive Jeeps are the ones that aren't selling, and the more affordable Jeeps, those are the ones that, you know, are having some marginal increases. Now, the next two brands, Dodge and Chrysler, I don't want to dive into the sales figures too much because they're actually doing pretty well right now. They've had increases year over year. But the thing to note is that, you know, especially Chrysler doesn't make up that much of the overall sales volume for Stellantis, right? And then when it comes to Dodge, they make up more when it comes to sales volume, but not a massive amount. And obviously, they don't make up enough to make up for the losses that were happened over on the Jeep side. Because if they did, then Stellantis, as you know, a company, wouldn't be down in the U.S. market. And then Ram also declined in sales, but not by nearly as much compared to Jeep, 8%. And, you know, a big part of why they didn't decline more is because the Ram ProMaster right now is completely sold out, and the ProMaster City also completely sold out. And the thing that's funny is Ram actually just got rid of the ProMaster City. Like, there's not a 2023 ProMaster City, and it's one of the vehicles that's actually helping the brand like stay up in sales figures. So it's funny that they got rid of a vehicle that is helping them out. And I feel like that's kind of somewhat of a story because if you go on the Jeep side of things, they're getting rid of the Cherokee, and the Jeep Cherokee is one of the few vehicles that they have that is positive year over year. But anyways, I digress. If you look at the Ram 1500, sales decline of 17% year over year. So it shows that, you know, one of Ram's actual like retail vehicles, right? Because ProMasters, a lot of those go to fleet, and a lot of those go to companies. Retail piece, right? Ram 1500. That has a decline similar to Jeep's average decline. And so it shows you that retail customers aren't as interested in Ram. And then another brand that's just very small but still had a decline was Alfa Romeo, 27% decline year over year. And this is interesting because Alfa Romeo is just not a huge brand here in the U.S. They sell, you know, maybe 10 to 20,000 cars in a given year here in the U.S. market. And so, you know, depending on what happens, like, could we see the end of Alfa Romeo here in the U.S. in the future? Who knows? We're already seeing the end of Fiat because they're pretty much on their way out here in the U.S. market. And so, you know, after going through the data, you can see that you basically have most of the brands in the hole, and, well, the brand that accounts for the most volume for Stellantis, Jeep, in the hole the most. And now before we get into my conclusion, I want to quickly dive back into that incentive spend side of things. So Stellantis cut incentives by nearly 3% down to, like I said earlier, $2,355 on average per vehicle. Now, this isn't even across all brands. And so if you look at Jeep, they had an increase in incentive spend to just over $2,000 per vehicle. And then you look at, brands like Dodge, they also had an increase in incentive spend, Alfa Romeo as well. But anecdotally, I can tell you, looking at the different product, what I've noticed is if they have any vehicle that has like somewhat of a like hot market behind it, there's absolutely no incentive spend on it. So like look at Ram TRXs, for example, look at Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392s, no incentives on those, right? Because those vehicles are still hot. And so that's where a lot of the, cutting has come from is, they might have had incentives just across the board. And instead of having incentives across the board, they've only placed incentives on vehicles that are struggling to sell in today's market. So now that we've gone over the data, we can finally get to the conclusion of this situation. This is just my opinion on why all of this is happening with Stellantis. And again, I think it makes pretty logical sense. So first off, you have a manufacturer that has continued to increase the MSRP prices on their product. At the same time, they have decreased incentive spend because again, the average transaction price with Stellantis product still increased year over year. So that means that most of their vehicles on average are slightly more expensive. And they're doing this at the same time that they are getting rid of a lot of their affordable models. Again, the Jeep Cherokee, looks like that's going away. The Ram ProMaster City, that's a more affordable cargo van, that's already gone. There's not a 2023 Ram ProMaster City. And so it makes logical sense as to why they're selling fewer cars. Again, we are in a car market where things are declining, right? Interest rates are really high. And at the same time the interest rates are really high, you have the average consumer that doesn't have as much money today as what they had at the same time last year. And so like car affordability is at not an all-time, low, but it's pretty bad right now. And so as a manufacturer, like if you want to sell cars in today's market, you've got to focus on building more affordable cars. And if you want to sell the more expensive vehicles, the only way you're going to convince people to buy those more expensive vehicles in today's market is not with fancy features and all that. It's going to be with big discounts. That is the way forward with the market that we are going into. And frankly, this makes a lot of logical sense to me as someone who sold cars prior to the pandemic, because prior to the pandemic, what typically happened is the affordable vehicles sometimes had incentives on them, but typically they would sell for somewhere around original MSRP. And then the more expensive vehicles almost always had big discounts because that's what convinced people to buy those more expensive vehicles, because they always felt like they were getting a deal because they were getting those big discounts. And frankly, the MSRP prices on these more expensive vehicles were always so high that the only way to convince someone to buy them was to discount them massively off of that original MSRP. And so, I guess if Stellantis wants to continue to go down the road of trying to basically save every ounce of profit that they can, then yeah, keep doing what they're doing. They'll obviously continue to go down in sales volume, but they will be able to maintain those profits. But if they want to regain some of the lost market share and to get rid of these vehicles that are on dealer lots that are currently not selling, then they need to increase incentive spend, not decrease incentive spend. And they need to especially increase incentive spend on the more expensive vehicles. I can understand not spending as much money on incentives on the more affordable vehicles that are, again, that are selling better year over year. But for the more expensive vehicles that are struggling to sell, like, again, the Wagoneers and the Grand Cherokees, the Ram 1500s, like, throw some more cash at those vehicles if you want them to sell. Let me know what you guys would like to see from Stellantis if you're looking at any of the brands under their umbrella. And with that being said, I'll see you.